Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, May 10th. I want to just say a couple of things before we get started this evening. We've got the mayor's unable to be here, and we've got two councillors on the telephone. And I'm going to ask everyone's patience in trying to be orderly about how we get their input on issues. Can both Councillor Stevens and Johnson hear me? Councillor Johnson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. So when we have an item for discussion, rather than you piping in with trying to get a comment in, I will systematically ask you if you have any input on each one that comes along. And when it comes time for voting, I'm going to ask you to vote orally by stating your name and whether you are yay or nay. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, great. Thank you. So we'll start off our meeting with acknowledgements. The town of Ladysmith acknowledges with gratitude that this meeting takes place on the traditional unceded territory of the Staminas First Nations. And with that, we'll call the meeting to order. First thing on the agenda is agenda approval. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Jacobson, seconded by Councillor Vertanen, to approve the agenda. And any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. And moving on to the minutes. These are the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held March 10th, 2022. Do we have a seconder and a mover? Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Jacobson. Are there any changes or deletions from those minutes? Okay, seeing none. Do we have all in favor? Thank you. Moving on, sorry? Did you want to confirm whether... Thank you. Can I get a confirmation from Councillor Stevens and Johnson on the approval of the minutes?
Approved.
Marsh? Yep, approved for Marsh.
Rob? Approved.
Thank you. On to reports. That system will work well, I think. On to reports. This is item 4.1, our building inspector's report for January-April 2022. And the recommendation is to receive the building inspector's report for the months of January to April 2022. Moved by Councillor Jacobson, seconded by Councillor Vertanen. Is there any discussion or questions from the table? Do we have any questions from Councillors Jacobson or Stevens? Sorry, Councillor Stevens or Johnson.
No question.
No.
Thank you.
No.
Seeing no questions, I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor? And Councillors Stevens and Jacobs, sorry, it's the J, Stevens and Johnson.
Yes.
Both in favor. All right, moving on to item 4.2. This is the Ladysmith Fire Rescue Report. The recommendation is that the committee receive the Ladysmith Fire and Rescue Report for the months of January to April 2022. And moved by Councillor Jacobson, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Any questions? Any questions from Johnson or Stevens? Thanks. Just continue to help me.
No.
Councillor Johnson, no.
Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? All in favor here. And from Councillor Stevens?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to 4.3. We've got Coastal Animal Control Services. The recommendation is that the committee receive the Coastal Animal Control Services report for the months of January to March 2022. And it's been moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Vertanen. Any discussion or questions? Any questions from the phone lines?
No question, Johnson.
No question.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor? And from Councillor Stevens,
Yes.
Johnson?
Yay.
Thank you. Moving on to 4.4, recommendation is that the committee receive the RCMP reports for the months of October 2021 to March 2022. These are from backlog. Do we have a mover? Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Virtanen. Any questions from the RCMP reports?
Yes. Councillor Johnson?
Okay, Councillor Johnson, what is your question?
Just a comment. I asked in the past if the report could also include concerns about drug use and drug dealing and that. I was hoping that would be in this report. Can we see if we can get this in future?
Through to staff.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Johnson, that stat is included because they consider it that the result may be from that activity, but it's not generally determined that way. I can reach out to the staff sergeant to provide an answer for that, but it wouldn't become an actual stat on their report.
Question, Maureen?
Councillor Johnson?
What is the best way, in your opinion, as to how we can find out the situation of drugs in our community?
Through to staff.
Through the chair, when that question was posed of the RCMP, they indicated that there is drug activity within the community. However, it wasn't at a level that it would be brought forward to council or an indication that more RCMP enforcement was necessary.
So Councillor Johnson, just to reiterate that, I think that's just suggesting that if the problem was deemed as significantly serious in the eyes of our detachment, that we would be brought more information on it. But as it is right now, it is not deemed as a significant issue for the community. But I'm quite confident that they monitor it closely. Do we have a question through?
For now.
Thank you. Through to staff again.
Sorry, through the
I've got it
chair.
once.
Also, it is noted by Staff Sergeant that is one of the goals of this council is to maintain active on that and monitor it closely.
And they're aware of that. Thank you. Councillor Virtanen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I guess through to staff, the numbers, almost every one of them are rising, and a couple of them quite a bit so. Now, I know sometimes that's been from a couple bad apples end up in the town and they shoot the numbers up. Is that the case here, or is this actually an indicative trend? I'm looking at like assaults have more than doubled. A lot of the other ones have gone from zero to
So there is clarification on one of those particularly. I will put it through to our CIO.
Thank you. Through the chair, Councillor Virtanen. The assaults on the report for the fourth quarter municipal area only, it should read that there has been an increase to 16 assaults for fourth quarter 2021 as compared to the fourth quarter in 2020 being 11. So there's been an increase of 5. In reviewing,
There was a typo.
in reviewing with the staff sergeant, he's reviewed some of the files and some do indicate there could be an increase in alcohol consumption that could possibly be contributing to that, but there didn't seem to be a significant escalation. He's put in summary there has not been a significant escalation in assaults or thefts within the town of Ladysmith when comparing the same quarters from last year to year. So they seem to be, confident in their control of the matters of the report.
And I would add to that also, in my analysis of it, I realized that we are, in fact, a growing population. And with a growing population, everything grows, every aspect of it. So, and that, yeah, it's not being seen as a serious rise at this point. Councillor Stevens, do you have any questions on this?
No, thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor of receiving the report? And Councillor Stevens?
Yes.
Councillor Johnson?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor. Moving on then to item 4.5. The recommendation is that the committee receive the staff report dated May 10th, 2022 regarding the 2022 Q1 first quarter financial update. And do we have a mover, Councillor Jacobson, and seconded by Councillor Virtanen? Is there any discussion or questions? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just on the front page there, Table 1, it says everything is favorable except for the cemetery operations, parks, recreation, and facility. And it says unfavorable. What does that mean?
Through to staff.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Patterson, I'm trying to do a way of presenting it in a way that is a little bit more readable, because sometimes negatives were actually positives and positives were negatives. So I'm trying to show in the accounting way if it's a good variance or a bad variance. So favorable would be it's good. It's in the favor of the town to be in a position being under budget. Unfavorable means we're going to be over budget.
Okay.
So some of those ones where it says like cemetery, I'm projecting that we're actually going to be $6,000 over budget in that case. Our revenues are not going to be enough to offset those costs. And as well in, well, parks will probably pretty much be right on the money. So there could be favorable, unfavorable. The recreation is going to be over budget. The revenues again are not going to be hit the targets, and the expenses are also probably going to be over what the budget is, which means it is not in the favor of the town. It's not good.
And water, it's going to be unfavorable?
So water will be unfavorable, sorry, through the chair. Water will be unfavorable, but because we use the same personnel in sewer and water, if there's more water activities, they will be those people will be going to those activities and versus sewer, so we can see fluctuations between those. If the personnel is high in water, it's going to be low in sewer, or vice versa. In this case, there's going to be some personnel, but it's also going to be some of our costs are for chemicals. Those have just skyrocketed, and as well, there's a hydro cost of that one as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarity. Councillor Jacobson had a question.
Is there something in particular that's causing that, or are there a number of factors?
Through to staff.
There's a number of factors. So when we did the budget, we were hoping that COVID was going to be gone and everything was going to be back to normal. So we did have some restrictions lifted in that period of time, but it did not translate directly into our revenues. So some of those some of the programs that we operate that have staff that we hire extra people to put the program on and then we don't make the revenues, we can peel those ones back, so we will have a decrease in the expenses versus the revenues. But some of those programs are capped at the limits of how many people we can have in, and if the revenues aren't making it, but we still have the exact same people to run them, the cost just unfortunately exceeds what we're going to be making on them. So just projecting the revenues forward to the end of the year, I'm thinking that we're going to be under budget by a number of those items. Fortunately, we still have the COVID recovery funds to offset some of those revenues. But the expenses, there's some things, again, chemicals are also another expense that we have going through in Parks and Rec, and also some of the facility costs, but I'm projecting that's going to be over budget.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, do you have any questions on this one?
Yes, I just have two quick questions. One going back to the cemetery. In those costs, are we still looking at the columbariums? And if so, what effect does that have on those figures? And the second one, I'll wait for the first one to be answered.
Councillor Johnson, I actually missed what you asked there. Could you repeat the question?
In regards to the financial situation, in regards to the cemetery, we have been talking about putting columbariums up there. Funding is those columbariums part of the increased cost for the cemetery, or is it other aspects?
Thank you for clarity. Through to staff.
Through the council, through to the chair. Councillor Johnson, we do not have a columbarium at this point in time, so the projections would be the cost of what our revenues would be and the expenses as we currently have it. I did allude to it in the report that we are looking at changing our bylaws to increase some of the fees, but at this point in time, that would be a large capital expenditure to create a columbarium that we could be utilizing for the cemetery, the cremated remains. So basically, no, it does not include the columbarium.
So the quick answer is no. Thank you. Councillor Johnson, do you have a follow-up?
No, it's a different question.
Okay.
I was looking at the pages, I believe it's 34, and under completed projects, I see the demolition of the food bank was budgeted for $45,000, and it only cost $15,000. Where do we put those surplus funds?
Through to Director of Finance.
Through the chair. So the cost of what we is only expended to the end of March. So there could be additional costs, even though the project is complete. There still could be additional costs. And again, it would depend on what the project was. But I believe this one was from taxation. So those would be you would go into surplus, or other projects that could be over budget. We would come back to council and ask to reallocate some of those funds back to a different project.
Thank you. Is that?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. Are there any further questions from the table? Okay. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And Councillor Johnson?
Yay.
And Councillor Stevens?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Now, this takes us to 4.6, and the recommendation is that the committee determine refinements to the grant in aid policy. I'm going to start this off by suggesting that we that this is the first of perhaps a few discussions that we have, and that we wouldn't be looking today to making any firm decisions or finalizing anything. I think it's really important that our entire council be here, and with our mayor missing, and plus the somewhat less organic way of having discussion with two people on the phone, I don't think we're perhaps doing the best we could do with this. But what I would suggest is that perhaps we go around the table, and each person, if they choose, to weigh in on just sort of their first blush. I'm assuming that everybody has gone on and read the attached report, which was, I believe, from 2016, which laid out a number of possible variations to what we currently do. One or two of those have already been incorporated into the new policy. But taking into account what those are indicating, what are your first thoughts as to things that you'd like to see kept or changed? And knowing that this is not necessarily our only kick at it, but just your first thoughts about it. So if just a straw vote at the table, is everyone comfortable with that approach? And Councillor Johnson and Stevens, okay with that approach?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So then if I would like to start, who at the table would like to start us off? Okay, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. I do agree with you that this is a subject that, because it's not going to please probably a whole pile of people, that we can kick it around, but I would like to see the in-depth discussion be with full council. I've had the opportunity of going online and looking at similar-sized communities and what they do, and some of them don't even do it. But there is stuff in the report here. One of the things I would like to have when we do have a bigger discussion is copies of what other municipalities or links to other municipalities on their grants and aid program. I do feel that some of the programs that we fund are ongoing and starting to rely totally on what they receive from the town, and does that make them sustainable? I'd also like to find out how many actually do fundraising instead of just relying on grants from us and grants from other areas of government, because that doesn't really make them sustainable either. So, and the length of time that we do support projects, events, etc. within the community, I think we need to look at. And also I feel that we should cap the amount of funds that are given to any particular group.
Thank you. Would you like to share your thoughts, Councillor Virtanen?
Sure, thanks, Madam Chair. And actually, to echo you, and then echo Duck on another part, I agree with waiting for the whole committee. I actually even wouldn't mind this if we asked for a report somewhere to push us past the election, because this could be, I don't want to keep putting things on new council, but I mean, we're gonna upset some people on this, and to make that an issue, this is less than 1% of our taxation. We spend an awful lot of time talking about it. So hopefully, if we do ask for a report somewhere, it can be November. But also talk what you were saying too. Yeah, I don't particularly care for groups that just count on it and don't do fundraising, but I'm also aware that there's only so many fundraising dollars that go around as well, right? So I'm torn on it. I mean, sometimes I don't like doing it, and you're always making somebody happy and somebody mad. Yet at the same time, I do like that the town's involved on events, because some events probably wouldn't happen regardless of the fundraising that happens. So I'm looking forward to a great, bigger discussion and maybe some comparisons of other municipalities and stuff like that. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jacobson.
So I'm happy to wait for a further in-depth discussion as well. I think hopefully everybody's in agreement about that. I have brought it up a couple times, and it might be good to have it written into policy that we, as the town, maybe provide for the first few years, if we decide to peel back on the funding for grants and aid, grant writing workshop, and maybe some sort of training to help these organizations find additional funding on their own. So I do also really like the idea that if we do continue with significant financing, that we have some accounting coming back from the organizations with their application, and again, seeing what their other sources of funds are through fundraising, if it's all grant money from other sources, that sort of stuff. And I would actually I think it might be good for us and, well, a future council, I guess, to see almost a reporting back after into how successful an event was, if they raised additional funds after an event that we contributed to, just kind of just even something really simple report back on how an event proceeded, if they, had an increase in attendance, if they were able to run additional fundraisings throughout at the event, or collect donations or anything like that. I would like to see a little bit more of that, but I'm happy to have a look too at what other municipalities of our size and sort of similar tourism based, I guess, populations that are, or communities.
Similar profile.
Yeah,
kind of
similar
community.
profile to what Ladysmith is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Keeping in mind that we are entirely unique and special. I understand what you mean. Okay, Councillor Johnson, do you have any thoughts you want to share with us right now?
Yeah, a couple of quick things. I agree it has to be the committee in person having a great discussion of this. But there's two things. What we are looking at, we're funding now, are some long-term events that have economic impact in the community. And we have to evaluate those and maybe look at those as potential line items in our budget, because the benefits we offset the donations or the support that the town has given them. And that would free up money for new ventures. As the tourism is increasing in our economic picture for our community, new events can be worthwhile. But we can be helpless starters. I've mentioned this in the past, how Councillor Fraser many years ago brought forth an idea I liked, and that was as much as possible fully fund them the first year, 50% the second year, 25% the third year, and if they're not economically viable, then they fall by the side. But so there's two issues: one, new projects, and one is long-term ones that have economic benefits in town, and those have to be evaluated. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. So, just first blush, and I would say there are more questions in my mind than positions that I have, but I think certainly the things we need to look at, some of them have been mentioned, and I'll try and give credit where credit is due as I go here. I think, first off, I'll say I have a lot of faith that a motivated community group with a relatively small amount of funds can do incredible things. That said, I'd echo the concern about ongoing operations or something that's very close in optics, that year after year you're coming back and not looking for other sources of funding. I think it's worth looking at the notion of how many of the supports that the town allots to organizations that you're able to qualify for. If you're getting a permissive tax exemption, if you're getting a break on rent, should you be getting a grant aid, or vice versa on any of those situations? I think that's a valid question to look at and ask. I think that probably, and I frankly would roll some aspects of the service contracts into this discussion at a later date when we're all together, because I think there are some parallel issues that go on in those. And I think that's something else may come to me. At first blush, though, those are the things. I would echo Councillor Jacobson's comment about utilizing some of the grant and aid funds for sort of a collective capacity building, fundraising, governance, things that will help fledgling organizations, which I think these grants should be mostly focused at, to self-empower and set them on the road to success, so that, as Councillor Johnson is saying, 2, 3, 4 years out, they're not wholly reliant on us or any other form of funding. They've got a good variety of funds coming in, so they're kind of insulated from losing one stream of funding. They're still a viable organization. So thanks. Those are my points.
Thank you. Excellent points by everybody, and I really appreciate everyone taking different angles on this topic. Many of the things I've been thinking about have been mentioned already, and I won't spend time going over them again. The one that I will mention, though, is I think it's key, and it's going to go in contrast to Councillor Vertana's point, and I apologize for that. And here's my point. I think it's critically important that we make this decision in our tenure in this council, because if there is a big turnover of individuals onto the next council, we're going to be handing them a task right out of the gate that they have little background in understanding, and they don't have the same depth of appreciation on what it's all about that we are going to be having at the end of our 4 years. I realize it's risky. I realize nobody wants to tick anybody off before an election if you want to run again, or we don't want to make the community annoyed with us. But part of our responsibility is make sure that we're making our decisions in a responsible way that is accountable to the rest of the community, not just those who are accessing our 1% of our budget. everyone gets access to it ultimately through the services that these great organizations provide. But I would like to see us be brave and have these hard discussions, come up with a solid policy that we all feel comfortable with, and be able to inform people in a timely manner before next year, before the next budget gets going, so that it's eyes wide open. I think we did some preliminary work this year when we had our discussions around the fact that we need to have more talk. All we do is talk about the fact that we need to talk about it. We haven't actually done the hard work to do it. So I think I would encourage everyone to give that some thought, and I would not want to see us defer this to another term of council, because I think it gets batted around. I think that's why all the hard work got done in 2016 and almost nothing changed. So let's see if we can create a system that's going to actually be workable, that everyone can feel good about. And it's actually the key to getting going on it is first of us deciding, what is our grant and aid program about? What's our goal? What's our objective with our grant and aid program? And then create the policy that makes sure that we're doing that. So that's just the piece. I won't add any more details into the nuts and bolts of it, because I think most of them were covered well. But that's just the piece I would leave this discussion with, is to encourage us to take it on before the end of our term and see if we can't come to a pretty solid policy. So, all right. Did anyone want to have another comment on that? We can go around again. Is everyone comfortable? Seeing no hands. Is there anyone on the phone line who would like to have another comment?
No.
Nothing.
Okay. Do we have to take a vote on anything, or can we just leave that as it is?
I guess the vote would, or a motion would be appropriate as to when council would like staff to bring this back, or the committee would like staff to bring this back.
And I will go through to our CAO for comment.
Thank you, Chair. We just wanted to add that if it is deferred until the fall, this would be the policy that would stand for the 2023 grants and aid, because a new policy, time-wise, more or less would not be passed to come into effect. So then the next policy would be like for 2024. So I just wanted council to be aware of that if they do defer it to the fall. Thank you.
And that was my point in trying to encourage everyone to be taking it on now. Councillor Jacobson, your hand was up.
Through to staff, the things that we requested, would it be enough time to come back to the next committee of the whole meeting, and hopefully it's not a committee of the half meeting?
Very funny. Through to staff.
Through the chair, I believe we could get a few of the comparative municipalities, but some of the other higher level items, like is grant and aid for operations, or is it for just a one-time kind of thing? Those would be information that we probably could not get back at the next meeting. Those are more of the discussion points, but we can definitely do the research parts of these for sure.
And I think that's fair, that if you can bring us the material, we can do our own research into it and make our own decisions and form what we think needs to look like. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. I think with the only potential changes, if any, organizations should be given a year's grace. So if we make a decision before October or after, I feel that there should be opportunity for people that apply for grants and aid to live under the old rules for, say, a year, to kind of adjust themselves.
Okay, and I think that's something we could work into our discussion. I don't think we have to make that decision tonight, but I can see some valid pieces to that. Councillor Bertanen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, maybe I didn't explain myself good enough. I was already looking at the time period, like if we put this off for 2 months, I mean, is this really something that we need staff to be dropping everything to deal with? I'm not even sure, besides some of us liking things and not liking things, I'm not so sure this is a big deal. Like you said, we talk about it, and we talk about it, but there's also a reason we haven't done anything, because I just don't know how big of a deal it is. Not saying that we shouldn't try to make something, but I just don't know if we should be asking staff to drop things or rush something through when, because I agree with Councillor Patterson, I think we have to give them at least a year. Say, hey, here's the plans. Yes, you can have it for the upcoming year, but moving forward, this is where we're going. Because that will cause some groups real troubles, right? So, anyways.
Okay, fair enough. I'm just wondering if we can still go through with with a motion, if somebody wants to put on a motion to at least have it on the table again for discussion next committee of the whole meeting.
It's Mark.
Okay, go ahead, sorry.
I would move that for the July meeting of the committee of the whole, staff bring back as much information as viable and or possible to us for further discussion.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Patterson. Is that a motion clear, Ms. Smith? Yeah. Okay. Any
Question on the motion? Question on the motion?
It's been seconded. It's been seconded by Councillor Patterson. Did you have a comment or question, Councillor Johnson?
The only part, I like the motion. The only part is, I think that we have to look at some of the larger amounts we're giving to things like festival lights and celebrations as more along the lines of services to the community, and not as a grant made, but as a line item. Things like the work that the archives are doing, it's not it's not a tourism activated economic stimulus for the community, but it's an important need. So I would like to see, when we get this information back, a good hard look at the organizations, if they should be looked at as grant and aid or potentially as service contracts.
Okay, I appreciate your sentiment. It would certainly be a natural part of the conversation, I think, on the next go round for discussion. I don't think it interferes with passing the motion or voting on the motion at this point. Councillor Stevens, do you have any comments on the motion? This is just to bring it.
No.
Bring it back. Okay. Anyone else at the table with comments or questions? Okay. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion as posed. Thank you. And Councillor Stevens?
Yes.
And Councillor Johnson?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion is passed. All right. That takes us on to council submissions. The first one is item 5.1, called Drought Resistant Plants in Plant Boxes on First Avenue. And this is an item which has been brought to the table by Councillor Jacobson. And I'm wondering if I should read the recommendations to start with, and then we can have discussion. Okay? The recommendation being that the committee directs staff to prepare a report for consideration at a future committee of the whole meeting that outlines the options and budget to replace flowers and planter boxes on First Avenue for the 2023 planting season with drought-resistant plants and or vegetables. And moved by Councillor Jacobson, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Would you like to speak to it to start us off, Councillor Jacobson?
Nope, it's pretty clear. Staff did a great job.
Okay, Councillor Vertanen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea, but my question is, haven't we talked about this before? I thought we had did we just discuss it in no motions? Yeah. But this seemed very familiar. Oh, okay. Okay, so.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have, and previous councils have discussed this, as well as even the hanging basket. So I see the head kahuna from Public Works is at the table, so we're probably going to get some information. My only concern is that and I do agree that we should look at drought resistant, but let's keep the beauty in downtown as well. So that's my 2 bits worth.
Thank you. Councillor Jacobson.
Through to staff, in these considerations, would we be working with naturally sourced species, like species that are normally found within our area.
Sorry, through to staff.
Through the chair. First of all, I'm not an expert in horticulture or anything like that, but I have discussed it with our parks team before this meeting, and my understanding is the answer is no. Most of the native species would not work well in planters and things like that because they're actually sourced from a rainforest, and those places are quite hostile. They're very hot, they're in concrete, there's road salt and things like that, and they don't do very well in those sorts of places.
So we'd be looking at bringing in new species and such.
Yeah, they have a list of a whole bunch of Latin names of plants that I don't know, but
Okay.
they've already been experimenting with this, and they do the corn beans or corn peas thing right out here in front of
Yeah.
town hall and stuff like that. So they have been doing that kind of stuff, and they have some ideas that could work for this.
Great, thank you. Councillor Vertanen.
Sorry, Ryan just said something that triggered a memory. Yeah, as part of this report, if this recommendation passes, if somebody could actually look into the historical nature of some of the plants, because I remember talking to Glen Britton, and right along, I want to say it's closer, it's kind of across from Zach's, I think is a plant that goes back to Kay Gruel's days, and Glen Britton saved part of it. And so maybe a lot of people might not know that, but it does have some historical. So just maybe if there's some type of, I don't know who you're talking, well, maybe Glenn, I guess, but somebody that knows some of the history on that, because maybe there's others. But I do know he talked to us about that one.
Thank you. Councillor Jacob, or Councillor Johnson, do you have any questions or comments on this item?
Yes, I have.
Somebody's, excuse me, Councillor Johnson, just before you get going,
Yeah.
somebody's got their
Right.
microphone too close. There's a lot of breathing going on or something, and it's very difficult to understand what's being said. So something physically not working in the environment you're speaking from. Can you try again?
Okay. Should be, because it's quiet here. Anyways, the point I'm saying is that the motion that refers to plants, I would also like to see shrubs. I have made the point numerous times that the shrubs are overgrown and old and root bound, and we need to have a new look for First Avenue. We were named a great street, Main Street of Canada, and we want to maintain a look and feel for the Main Street that is colorful and bright. I don't necessarily agree that we have to go with native plants. It's a relatively short season where we can have colorful plants, and we are becoming known more and more as a destination for tourists. The main draw is still the bakery, but people do come to town, and including the boaters coming up here. If we want to have a showcase, we spend a lot of money on beautiful banners downtown. We want to carry that colorful theme throughout the whole place. So when we have shrubs that are 20, 30 years old, and we have dull-looking plants, it doesn't enhance the beauty of our community and the marketability of it from a tourist point of view, which will have economic value to the community as a whole. Those are my key points. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And Councillor Stevens?
The thing that comes to mind for me, and I fully get the idea of color. Well, I've got a bit of an echo, sorry. I know on my own boulevard, the most mindless plant to look after is ornamental grasses. They give you lots and they ask for nothing. So if that could be put in the mix, it's not a color solution, but there's a lot of them that are wispy and blow around in the wind and are really interesting visually, I think. So that and a splash of color might be something to consider in the mix.
Thank you. We're all wondering if you perhaps have R2-D2 with you. You got
No, I do not.
some pings and bings going on in the background there. Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments? We have a recommendation on the table.
If I make one point,
Yes, Councillor Johnson, go ahead.
Yeah. If we are looking at doing things with the planter boxes, I would like to have them consider the idea of including a directional signage in them. We've got signage board signs around town, but if we could put in some directional posts with signs to be hung on, and those planters, we can solve two problems. One being that it helps promote our businesses by pointing people to them, and two, gets rid of the ugly signage board signs. So that could be part of the planter project. Thank you.
I'm sure staff can look at that as they're discussing how to move forward with this rejuvenation of our planter boxes. Any comment from staff?
Through the chair, we can investigate wayfinding signage or, that sort of thing. I'm not sure.
I believe we're waiting for grants for the wayfinding signs is what the problem is. So if we get grants through, then it could perhaps be incorporated. But I also think it's a big question, and I think it needs to be looked at well so as not to lose the signage in the planter. And also, wayfinding signs are of no use whatsoever if they don't help us find our way. So we have to make sure that's the priority. So, but perhaps it can be incorporated. So, thank you. Are there other comments or questions? Okay, I will call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Stevens?
Yes.
Councillor Johnson?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor. Moving on then to another discussion item. This is from Councillor Jacobson also about adding a crosswalk on Malone Road behind the track at Ladysmith Secondary School. I'll hand over to Councillor Jacobson.
Thank you. I was hoping we could discuss, obviously, the possibility of adding a crosswalk at some point along Malone Road. There is a significant amount of traffic that is traveling between 6th Avenue up to Colonia and up to the, I believe it's Edgewater Estates up at the top, and then there's even more development going up at the end of Malone. And there actually are no crosswalks along Malone Road after 6th Avenue. So to come across to the other side, especially school-age children are frequently venturing out or trying to make their way across. So I was just hoping we could get, for safety's sake, if we could investigate the expense and just hopefully support the number of the amount of traffic as is, and then just going forward there's going to be a significant increase in that traffic, I think, going with the development going in. So I think it would probably be very beneficial to add something like that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree that we do need to have a couple of crosswalks on Malone Road. Having a crosswalk in the middle of a street, to me, is kind of scary. There is where Dunsmuir comes out. There could be one there, or further up. Actually, there needs to be one further up, where Colonia and Malone cross. And if we move forward with this, I would like us to, as part of the report coming back, look at the flashing light crosswalks, where the lights flash, you push the button, where in Brooks, Alberta, they have them, they're solar powered, and they cost about $12,000, and that's installed. So I would like to see us start doing that at the crosswalks. But yeah, I'm in favor of the crosswalk there, but I'm not too sure in the middle of the block at Malone or at, what the hell's that street come out? Mackey.
Yeah. So I'm, full disclosure, I live on Mackey, and so regularly I'm driving through that area, so I see this every day. I am open to crosswalks at any point along Malone Road. I don't think there's one part that would be, but it would make sense, obviously, to put it more on Dunsmuir or at the crossing of, or the T of Dunsmuir and Malone, and then the crossing at Colonia and Malone. So I wasn't thinking it would just be in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, just a comment I would make also, there is a natural slowing of the traffic at that point at Mackey because they narrow into the divided road, and there is a natural, and that's why it's divided, is to slow the traffic. So that may well, I would like to put it through to staff just to ask about the cost. Is there any ballpark costs, or what's the feasibility from your perspective on this kind of a request?
Through the chair, a crosswalk at Colonia and Malone would be the least expensive and least involved. Any of the crosswalks at a T intersection where you have a collector teeing into a local like that, you do have to be more cautious and involve the flashing lights and curb extensions and things like that to ensure safety, because the driver on the primary road on the collector is not necessarily paying attention like they are at a proper cross intersection. So as far as costs, the Colonia area would probably be as simple as a painted crosswalk, which would be in the ballpark of $500 to $1,000. Quite inexpensive. If you put a crosswalk somewhere like Mackey or Dunsmuir, you could be looking at tens of thousands of dollars, depending on how extravagant you go. I mean, you mentioned, Councillor Pattison, the flashers alone are about 10,000 plus for the solar style of flasher.
Okay, thank you. But it sounds very reasonable to put in just a basic painted sidewalk at a safe spot.
Yes, you got it.
So is that a decision that the town can make, or does ICBC get involved in that, or any other levels of government get involved in putting in crosswalks, or is it just something we can decide?
So through the chair, the town staff can decide something like that. ICBC can help out in certain cases where we are unsure about safety, if we want collision data, these sorts of things, and depending on how complex it goes, we could also involve a consultant.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, great information. Are there other questions from council? Councillor Stevens, anything?
I've got a bunch of thoughts, and maybe the question that I was thinking has been answered already, but I would agree with Councillors Patterson and Jacobson that some crosswalk along that corridor would be a good idea. We've got the schools right there and neighborhoods feeding. The things that occur to me are, we've done sort of baseline traffic counts on Mackey Road in anticipation of the crossing going in and future neighborhoods. So when we get those, we have those base numbers. When we get numbers as the build-out occurs across the creek, I think we're probably going to be in a situation that's both good and bad. One, the proponent is proposing quite good active transportation lines through that neighborhood. I think that can be extended onto I call it the newer part of Colonia, and a natural place for people, especially kids, to turn would be on Mackey Road. So maybe if it's complicated and expensive and you don't want to spend that money without all the input, we could put in the cheaper option at somewhere to give us a sort of stopgap measure. And then as the numbers and the design evolve at Mackey, we could have maybe a more of an active transportation versus just a pedestrian crossing there that had the proper design and expenditure. So doing the best we can right now, instead of going ahead with an expensive proposition. I certainly, the point about it being a T intersection being tougher to do, I certainly get that. So those are the things that come to mind. I'd like to definitely see something done in the medium to long term, but in the short term, if $500 to $1,000 would give us some crosswalk along there, I think it would be really beneficial.
Thank you for your comments. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Stevens' comments in regards to looking for a immediate solution, be it short term. To me, it goes back to the question of we have directed staff to investigate the feasibility of doing a long-term traffic flow study problem within our community. With that information, we will identify not only this area as a potential need for crosswalks, but other areas within the community, because, as I say, in our official community plan, we're looking at approximately a 50% increase in population over the next 28 years. So therefore, the question of crosswalks needs are going to be coming up more and more. So if it's tied in with this study, we look at that aspect or that one particular area, but the community as a whole. Because the other part that is of great concern in regards to traffic safety is around the schools. If you look at the studies that have been done as background for the official community plan that show walkability, especially to schools, there's a tremendous amount of the population that kids will not be walking to school, parents are going to be dropping them off, and we're going to have more and more congestion and traffic problems and potential accidents because of this congregation of vehicular traffic around our primary, secondary, and senior schools. So the point, the crosswalk with the community and the school is very valid and should be addressed now, but it should be part of this long-term plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a motion coming out of this from anyone? Well, there's no motion involved in this one, but it seems to me there could be a motion that could be fairly immediate around the easy one. Yes, go ahead.
Just another question through to staff, and maybe, is there room in the budget right now to add, even on the lower end measures of a crosswalk in the area?
Through to staff.
For the cheaper option, like the painted crosswalk at the, yeah, we would just slide that into our summer painting program. It'd be some additional staff time is all.
Go ahead.
Would there be room for any signage? Like, I know we have the reflective strips. Is there anything in terms of signage that can be added to that?
Go ahead.
Through the chair, yeah, that would be inclusive of that signage. It's necessary. Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead.
Can I make a motion?
Please make a motion. That's what I'm hoping.
I'd like to make a motion that council approve the
Request staff to.
Request staff to. No, I'm not going to do this properly at all. I'm sorry.
Ask her.
Yes, if the
Right.
committee is not asking for the report to come
Right.
back to a committee of the whole meeting, you're correct. It should be that the committee recommend that council.
Right.
Oh, okay. So make a motion that committee recommend to council, committee of the whole recommend to council approval of a crosswalk crossing Malone at the best position according to staff with to be put in place by September 2022. Is that reasonable?
Is that reasonable? Go ahead, staff.
Through the chair, the timeline is reasonable. I just ask that you allow us to do a warrant on the intersection first. So I've described the costs and what would be involved, but you're asking us, you're directing us to do it, whereas I think it would be safest if we analyze the intersection more wholesomely and then affirm that that can be done.
Go ahead. Are you going to try it again?
No.
Okay.
Through to staff, do you have enough information at this point to be able to make the best.
Through to staff.
Yeah, through the chair. So if the motion is worded properly, we would be able to do the warrant, and if it works, we would just go ahead and do the crosswalk.
Perhaps Ms. Smith
Does
can
that
help
make
us
sense?
with
I
the
don't
wording.
mean to convolute it.
No. Ms. Smith, can you help us with this?
I think what the committee might want to say, rather than recommending that council approve a crosswalk, that council direct staff to prepare a report for consideration by council regarding placing of a crosswalk on Malone Road at a safe position identified by staff. Does that cover it? Because then the staff report could cover all the options and investigate safety concerns or anything and provide a timeline as well. Does that work?
I think it works. I'm going to ask our director if perhaps does that take more time? Are you looking for more, perhaps the option to automatically put it in if you find it to be feasible?
I'm good with either way. If you want to report back, I could provide a more, a wholesome outlook on the whole Malone Road and give you a lot more detail. Or if you're interested in just getting that crosswalk in, then allow me to get the warrant and put in the crosswalk. And if for some reason it's not warranted or we find a safety concern, then I would come back to council and update you on that.
I personally would think that getting it in as quickly as possible is going to be in our best favor, especially since that area is growing and developing out. So
Is there a way to do that, Donna?
It could be just as simple as that the committee recommend that council direct staff to install a crosswalk at a position to be identified on Malone Road.
following their own investigation of it. And that covers it, I think. Yeah. Are you comfortable with that?
I'm happy with that, and it sounds from our discussion with staff too that we already have a pretty good idea of where it's going to go. So, yeah.
And I just know that from my experience with schools, a school will want a sidewalk or want a crosswalk, but it's not always as simple as the schools think. So putting it into the hands of those who know is, I think, wisest. Go ahead.
If I can add, the community has requested a sidewalk. We have received phone calls for not a sidewalk, a crosswalk at the Mackey
Awesome.
intersection. So this isn't coming out of anywhere, or out of nowhere, I should say. Yeah.
Okay, so can you read it back for us, Ms. Smith, and we'll...
That the committee recommend that council direct staff to install a crosswalk on Malone Road at a location identified by staff.
Is that enough?
Was there-
Okay, let's leave it at that. Any further discussion? Councillor Johnson?
No.
Councillor Stevens?
No.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All those, it was moved by Councillor Jacobson, seconded by Councillor Virtanen. All those in favor? Councillor Johnson?
Yay.
Councillor Stevens?
Yes.
Unanimously passed. Thank you. All right, we have one last item. We have, and this is an item brought to us by Councillor Stevens, and the name of it is Recreational Vehicles as Temporary Housing. I'm going to put it to Councillor Stevens to speak to it.
Thank you. First off, I've been remiss in not thanking you, Councillor Mackay, for taking over last minute during this meeting. I was ready and excited to do it myself, except that stupid second line appeared. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I'll tell you, I'm taking full advantage here of Committee of the Whole as a place where we discuss things for in greater detail and hopefully not too long a time frame. But this notion came from an email we received a while back from a member of the public. It was sort of couched in the language of thinking about Ukrainian refugees, but also made reference to the to the housing crisis and the use of recreational vehicles in some fashion to house people as a temporary method. So complex issue for sure. The email itself outlines some of the issues that I think you'd face. They're kind of like this would, in my mind, be sort of like coach houses. You'd have to look at setbacks from property lines, setbacks from existing structures. I think all those sort of details that we look at with accessory buildings. There's an element, I guess, on one side that it would be, if it were something that were formalized, it would be managed. You would know, much like the adoption of in-house suites, where there was an amnesty period for existing suites and to be brought up, and it was encouraging to make people, it be means of egress and fire alarms and things like that. So it has the possibility to be something that we could and manage. On the downside, of course, is the notion of enforcement. How do you do it? The cost involved with that. But I guess the question I wanted to bring to the committee and see what the collective wisdom and thoughts was, are we here yet, or are we there yet in terms of the housing crisis? We've seen the numbers on the applications to the newer large buildings in town. Anecdotally, we know people are constantly searching for housing. This, in my mind, if it were to go ahead, would have to be not a lot of rules, but certainly an element of it would have to be temporary. We'd have to have provisions around provision of water, disposal of sewage, things like that. And it gets complex with people being maybe put out that their neighbor's doing it, so that it have to be allowances around radiuses. All these things I'm cognizant of. I'm not on one side of the issue or the other, but I certainly acknowledge that we're in a bit of a state in terms of housing. So I thought I would just introduce the topic and turn it over to the rest of the group to see if there's any appetite to make a recommendation to council to further look into it or not.
Okay, I'll put it out to council for discussion. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, okay, it's catching. Yes, affordable housing is an issue. It's an issue everywhere. But I think opening up this one where people can stay even temporarily in recreational vehicles, it's not the quality of life that I would like to see people living in or families living in. I can see it creating issues with neighbors. It certainly is going to create an issue with enforcement. It's gonna, and how many do you put on a lot, and how many are empty when actually people are living in it? Disposal of sewer and garbage. It's going to open up a huge can of worms. I would rather see us put a stronger push on getting more affordable housing, more government subsidized housing, more land for it. I would rather see us put the onus on that than these. So I can't support permitting temporary RV housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the table with comments? Councillor Virtanen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question to staff. Is there kind of a one-size-fits-all policy across all municipalities, or just more regarding this issue?
Through to staff.
Through the chair, we haven't necessarily extensively researched it. It varies across jurisdictions. Often it's probably the most common scenario is temporary housing during construction. So people who buy a vacant lot are allowed to live in an RV while they build their home. That's something we don't do here. That would be a small policy change that would add 1 or 2 units per year to the market, simply because most people rent when they build their house, which takes a unit out of the rental stock. So that could be a solution. Sometimes there are policies with geographic constraints that allow RVs in certain areas or on certain properties to house, temporary workers or to deal with a severe shortage of housing. So it's certainly possible to look at. We also have to factor in two big considerations: sewer and water hookups. So it's not as simple as simply allowing someone to park an RV. You have backflow prevention that needs to be addressed with water hookups, making sure the water supply doesn't end up contaminated, so they're not, slapping together some kind of water setup, and as well as sewage disposal. So we would want a sewer connection into the sewer system. So bylaw amendments would need to be made for that, for sure. And then the other bigger issue as well is climate. And this gets down to the quality of housing, is that generally most recreational vehicles on the market are not designed for winter use. So during the winter, obviously the folks sleeping inside would probably be pretty uncomfortable if the camper isn't winterized, but also it can cause the unit to break, which can then in turn cause a nuisance or problem. So the tanks could burst, the sewer tank could burst, or the water tank could burst, cause flooding, things like that. So short answer to the question, not necessarily a clear picture of what other jurisdictions are doing, but a very clear picture of what the issues are if we choose to regulate it.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent answer, actually. Councillor Johnson, do you have any comments?
It's a rabbit hole I don't want to go down at this time. There's all kinds of unforeseen things that have to be studied in depth. And to say, this is not the time to start going down that one. When maybe got a new council, they can look at it, but not now. Thank you. And I'll just put my 2 cents in. Councillor Patterson, I think, said it eloquently. It's not. I see the potential for problems as vast and widespread, and the potential not just for those who are trying to do it correctly, but the difficulties for everyone, and the difficulties of trying to moderate and control it from being abused, I think will be very challenging. I don't think it's where we're at. I would prefer to see us supporting the idea of zoning an area that was appropriate for a small trailer park facility and allowing it to be done within the town of Ladysmith. That's not something we have really. So I would much prefer to see us look on that, and if somebody was to approach us requesting zoning, that we would look at doing a good job of that, as opposed to this measure, which I think is going to bring us greater problems than solving problems that would be out there. So Councillor Stevens, did you want to finish off? I think you're hearing the flavor of the table. Any other comments?
No, I for sure. I'm grateful, really grateful for the discussion and the answers provided by staff. At first blush, you might think the big advantage that something like this might have is speed, but the technical issues and how to mitigate those, I think, take a knock out of that notion of speed. So I like your idea of a dedicated parcel somewhere for these type of vehicles. I certainly knew coming in that it was something that was full of challenges. So, as I say, I wanted to talk about it and see where the collective thoughts and wisdom were, and I think we've done that. And I'm kind of happy that we think we aren't there yet, and that we can use other means to fight the issues and problems that we're facing around housing. So, thanks so much for the discussion.
Okay, Councillor Jacobson had a comment. Thank you.
Questions. This would be through to staff. So under our current bylaws, there's been a lot of buzz about tiny homes and that sort of movement. Would our current zoning for mobile home parks, would that enable someone, because most mobile home parks are privately owned, aren't they? Yeah, so I guess it would fall to the ownership if they wanted to allow for tiny homes, but does our zoning like prohibit anything like that?
Through the chair, yes. Many of our zones actually have a minimum unit size, which is a bit anomalous. Many municipalities have gotten away from the minimum unit size. So that is something we could look at removing. It has been flagged as a bit of an issue amongst staff, mainly for the fact that often we look at development proposals and they're like half a square meter under the minimum unit size, and then as a result we have to have them reconfigure or something. So it is possible if it does constitute a building and it is less than that minimum unit size, then it wouldn't be allowed in that zone. So that is something of an issue. Often tiny homes are constructed on trailers, so they don't necessarily constitute a building. So in that case, they may or may not be okay, depending on what the homeowner or what the property owner is comfortable with.
Thank you. And just a follow-up comment to that too is that there are communities who have zoned areas not as RV parks or trailer parks, but in fact tiny home parks, and they actually created a community around the use of and the building of tiny homes. So another thing that we could look at considering as well. There you go. Councillor Jacobson.
So might it be something that council wants to discuss is reviewing the minimum square footage for a unit, for a living unit?
Well, I just my personal feedback on it, because I'm the chair. To me, it doesn't matter how small we make it. Somebody else can always come and ask us for something smaller. So no matter how we change it, there's always going to be people on the outside of that. If we're looking at builds that are a couple of square meters shy of the minimum, then we could make the minimum significantly smaller, and there still might be somebody who's coming and asking for something smaller. So I'm not sure that it actually solves something, but I'll put it through to staff and get a comment.
Through the chair, most municipalities have completely discarded minimum unit sizes, and the reason being that when you add up all the requirements of the building code, although there isn't necessarily a minimum unit size in the building code, when you factor in things like minimum widths for doors, staircases, that in and of itself establishes a minimum size that is livable for some people, not everyone. So for that reason, it would be quite reasonable and practical to simply specify no minimum unit size in almost all zones in the zoning bylaw, and recognizing that there's you're really probably never going to see units less than, in Ladysmith, you're probably never going to see units less than 250 square feet or 500 square feet, which is quite sizable by tiny home standards, I guess.
I see what you mean. Okay, fair enough. And something to think about perhaps, but I'm not sure that it's fitting into the actual topic that we're discussing. It's sort of a whole thing all on its own. So I would suggest that we, if it's something which we want to bring up as for a discussion item or take to staff that for development or consideration of eliminating our minimum size, that we would handle that independently of this conversation. So, okay. Did you want to add, Councillor Stevens? Are you asking to speak?
Yeah. Yes, please. As Councillor Jacobson was speaking, I was thinking we did have a discussion, or maybe it was not a discussion, to me just commenting around coach houses and the notion of making, reducing or eliminating the minimum footprint on that in order to make them more affordable to build, because the price is becoming quite prohibitive. They're less of a mortgage helper and more of a mortgage maker, given square foot costs and that smaller versions. So maybe it's something as concurrently as staff is looking at that coming back and sort of a joint or parallel recommendation around minimum footprint sizes. I think it would really be something that would appeal to a lot of people who may be on the fence about whether it's worth their while to add an accessory building on their property for the purposes of housing. The other point that's been discussed, and it's one that's intriguing, is the notion of I've lost it now. It may come back to me. It can't be that.
I think I think perhaps we're going well off the topic at this point, but I think staff has also heard our comments and recognizing that there is potential for further discussion. So I would suggest that we leave this one. I don't believe there is a recommendation coming out of your discussion item, Councillor Stevens. Are you okay if we leave it at this point?
Again, thanks for the conversation, but I don't think we have any. It doesn't sound like there's any collective recommendation coming out.
I would agree. Okay, is there any new business? Anything we haven't got on our agendas? Okay, seeing nothing else, I am going to call for adjournment. Would anyone like to adjourn? Councillor Pattison, seconded by Councillor Vertan, and all in favor?
I just want everybody to note that the chair said I spoke eloquently.
We don't.
Did you know that?
I was just buttering them up. All in favor? And Councillor Johnson?
Aye.
Councillor Stevens?
Yes.
We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.